and welcome to Culture of Caring. I'm Natalie Boyle and really excited to get another episode with you guys. And today we're going to be focusing on our value that we call that we want to be extraordinary in what we do. And there's really a lot of different ways to define this. But one of the things that we say is that we're never satisfied with good enough. We lovingly push ourselves and each other toward our potential, and that we're willing to go the extra mile even when that last mile was hard. And that's one of the reasons that I invited today's guest on to talk about when we're talking about the topic of being extraordinary. Because what I think that when I think of extraordinary, I think of those people who are able to do amazing things even when life has dealt them a very rough hand. And so I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Vanita Halliburton, who is the co-founder and the executive chairman of the Grant Halliburton Foundation. So thank you, Vanita, for coming on today.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thank you. So I just want to start off by asking about, you to share kind of your story and how you wound up founding the Grant Halliburton Foundation.
Well, I wish it were a happy story that, just something came out of something good, but as it often happens, things come out of heartbreak and out of tragedy. So I've been the mom of two children, a girl named Amy and a boy named Grant, and they were not only brother and sister, but best friends. And Grant was just one of those kids who was always bouncing off the walls. He had a million friends. He just drew people to him like a magnet. He kept us laughing all the time with his antics and wit, and he astonished us with his talents in art and music. But when he was in 8th grade, I got a call from the school counselor. And she said, I have to tell you that your son's been self-injuring. He's been cutting. At the time, I just couldn't comprehend what she was talking about. And I was 1,000 miles away from home when I got that call in a business meeting. And I remember seeing it was the school, and I walked out of the meeting, and as she kept talking to me, I went down the escalator and walked out on the sidewalk, and I just sat down and cried. That my boy, who was so full of life and just brought so much happiness and joy to others, was suffering so much, and I didn't know it. So we got Grant some help, and for the next 5 years, he really fought hard to overcome his depression and anxiety and ultimately bipolar disorder. And sadly, though, he took his own life at the age of 19. So I just felt immediately like I was called to do something with this pain. If I couldn't figure out how to save him from this or see those warning signs, because I didn't know what the warning signs of suicide were, then the next best thing I could do is to make sure that other parents, other families, other teenagers know how to recognize those and respond to those signs of psychiatric crisis or despair in another person, and how to rescue them and connect them with help. So Grant Halliburton Foundation was born then in 2006. That was a long time ago. We've grown from a staff of 1, just me, to now a team of 18 really vibrant and committed a team that is out in the schools and in the community all the time, providing education, classroom by classroom, and throughout the community. A lot of programs now that we have around education. The 3 things we have are education, connection, and encouragement. So we're working in those 3 areas.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss, and it doesn't matter how many years ago that was. That is about the worst thing that a parent can experience. It is the worst thing. So I'm really impressed by your ability to say right away that this is something that I want to do something to help with. Mm-hmm. And so what was the process about when you actually started the foundation? How quickly was that after Grant passed?
Immediately. I mean, I knew within weeks that I had been a writer and producer in communications for decades, and I knew, I always say it felt like God just kind of picked me up and turned me around and said, you're going this direction now. Yeah. And I just knew instantly if there was anything I could do, at least having a communications background, to be able to help other people not be blindsided by what is essentially a treatable medical condition. And we know so much about other things to watch for in our children that, we just need more. If knowledge is key, we can help with that.
Yeah. And, speaking about mental health, and, May's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I think there's certainly a lot more awareness than there was even, a few years ago, 10 years ago, but Do you still find that there's a stigma attached to these mental health issues that keeps teens from getting help or parents from recognizing the signs?
I think definitely, and I keep saying this is a treatable medical condition, but there is literally no other medical condition that carries the stigma that mental illness still does. I mean, there used to be a stigma around cancer. Literally 40 years ago, people would whisper the word or say the C word. She's got cancer, literally. But that stigma is long gone now, and thanks largely to the efforts of the Komen Foundation and others who have just brought it out and talked about it. One thing we know about stigma is this: brought out of the shadows and into the light, stigma quickly dies. And so that is what we're doing with, and many other organizations too are doing these days with mental illness, making it something to talk about. Yep. When you're looking for a provider, I remember thinking when I got off that phone call with that counselor, she said, "You're going to need to get some help from him." And I thought, I don't have a clue where to even start getting help. You don't want to ask at least then more so, you don't want to ask your family or your neighbors or your friends or your coworkers, "I need a psychiatrist or something for my son." We just didn't feel comfortable doing that at that time. It's getting better, but it's still hard for people to find that. Not like asking for a referral to a dentist or a doctor. You'd ask anybody for that.
Well, and then the privacy of your child too, and wanting to protect however he was feeling about what was going on as well. So at Grant Halliburton Foundation, I know you said you focus a lot on education. What kind of resources do you have for families that are dealing with a child that is having mental health struggles?
Well, we think it's really important to attack this from a couple of different angles. First of all, we need to educate students themselves about treating their mental health like they would treat any other physical condition, anything. So we're in the schools, as I said, all the time. So far we have trained over 250,000 students, teachers, parents, adults, and in schools and in the community about looking out for those symptoms of depression, stress, how to manage stress, warning signs of suicide, and how to connect somebody with help. So that's our big thing. But connecting people with help is also huge. One thing we've done is we started a mental health navigation line. It's called the Here for Texas Mental Health Navigation Line. It's a separate number. It's staffed by trained volunteers who get 40 hours of training on how to help someone. It's not necessarily a crisis line, it's a helpline. So we have this conversation, they call in, it's a free service by the way. People call in, they tell us what they're looking for, we collect all the information we need, and what makes us different from other people who can give you resources is we tailor the resources that we email to them. So they've got the name, the website of that person or that resource, how to get in touch with them, and everything we can tell them about them. And it's in their geographic area. Then we call them back in a couple of weeks and say, did those resources work for you? Were you able to make an appointment? Can we help you with that? Do you need more help? So we stay with the person as long as they want to stay engaged with that. And I think that's just, I would have given anything to have had that number to call in that moment when I didn't know where to turn.
Right.
So
that's overwhelming at the moment that you get a diagnosis like that, and where do you go? And
right.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing we think is really important is encouragement. A parent in the fight for a child's mental health is in a very lonely place on the planet most of the time. So we started 12 years ago a free support group for moms who have a child with addiction or mental health issues, and it's peer support. It's not therapy. They help each other. They share information. They share resources. They talk about good therapists, bad therapists, good doctors, great resources, and mostly they support and encourage one another because everybody in the room is on the same road. So that's one thing. We also have a group for dads. We learned early on that men are not likely to come sit in a room with a box of Kleenex in the middle and talk about their children's mental health issues or issues in their family. So we have a quarterly breakfast series with a really engaging speaker for men, and it's really wonderful.
And then in terms of where your help is accessible, is that the Dallas-Fort Worth area? Is it just Dallas? Where can people access care from?
We focus on North Texas,
Okay.
but if somebody has a child in the hospital in Houston and they're being discharged and they don't know where to go, they're looking for a residential treatment center, which we don't have in Texas at all for young people. A law was just passed to make it okay to build those now, but we still don't have them built, I don't think. So we'll jump in with anybody, anywhere, anytime, and help them the best we can. But North Texas is where we really focus our in-school efforts and things like that.
Wow. And so important to be getting it to students in the schools because, and some parents are very well aware of mental health resources and things, but a lot who maybe haven't used it for themselves or haven't been around that before may not even know that kind of education is needed.
Right.
And so, I have twin girls who are in 4th grade. And I'm honestly, it's so hard raising kids in this world with social media and everything else. And so I'd love to hear just a little bit about, do you have any tips that you can share for parents that are trying to, help navigate this world for their children and both, what to watch out for and how to help if you start to see a child who's suffering?
I think one of the main things to watch out for is behaviors and moods. If you see a change in your child's behaviors, if they're starting to just be withdrawing from activities they used to enjoy, not as happy as they used to be, edgy, angry, anything like that you say, that's different, that's not like her, she's usually not like that. That is a little red flag to say to yourself, why? And just like anything else, if she were, complaining that her arm hurts, you would get a doctor to check that out. Even though you think maybe it's nothing, maybe it's minor, a passing thing, you might still get a doctor to check it out.
Yeah.
And we want to have the same philosophy toward mental and emotional issues. Get it checked out. See if there's anything going on that's beneath the surface that an assessment would pull out and show what's going on there. Discussion with a doctor. And by the way, primary care physician is an excellent place to start. I think sometimes we're kind of hesitant to take that step because we think, well, I don't know a therapist, I don't know a psychiatrist who can do this. Start with a pediatrician or primary care physician. They can refer you on later if necessary, but they can definitely do a mental health assessment for that. So the simplest of signs, moods, failure to fully engage with family or participation with the things they usually like to do, those are important things. The signs of warning signs of suicide are a little more in depth. We have a little acronym called TAG that says take it seriously, ask questions, and get help. And this is something we teach every time to kids and to adults as well. To take it seriously when you see those signs, ask the right questions, including, have you felt so bad lately that you've thought about ending your life? That is a hard question to look your child or someone you care about in the eye and ask, but if you don't ask, you won't know. And someone who is hurting that badly wants someone to acknowledge it. They want to talk about it. So opening that door is really important. And then get help. We just talk about, the kind of resources that are available.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the asking the right questions. I think that is something that is so hard to know what to ask and, to tread, do I ask that? If I ask, is that going to make it worse? Is the child who hasn't thought of that going to then think of it and things like that? And so,
we've talked to people. We haven't. Research shows that people who have been suicidal but survived, obviously, and they say it was such a relief when they could finally talk to someone about this. When somebody made it okay to talk about how they're feeling to the point of feeling suicidal. So it's really important to validate their feelings in that way and open the door to getting help.
Yeah. Well, and I think going back to something else that you said around really treating mental health as part of overall health. And I think that's so vital, is that just like you don't ask somebody with a broken leg to be able to just walk it off, right? Like you have to start looking at that as a part of a person's wellness and the mental health is a part of health in general.
Right.
And that's something we have definitely always believed, is because mental health and addiction recovery are can be a health crisis, right? And unfortunately, sometimes those two pair very closely together. And so, you know, I have a brother we lost in. While he didn't take his own life, he was making choices because of mental health issues that wound up leading to that. And so, so that's something that I definitely can connect with. And,
yeah, I'm so sorry. You know, back to your question about the importance of talking about this. A lot of times, the natural response to that is, I wouldn't know where to start. This is uncomfortable. How do I talk to my child about this? They're going to back up and go, Mom, no, I'm fine. Just put up that big wall. So it's really important that for parents to lay the groundwork for having open and easy conversations with their children. On our website, you can find a flyer that's called "How to Start the Conversation." How to start the conversation, and it's as simple as having some easy questions in mind, like. If somebody gave you $1,000, what would you do with it? And choose your opportunities, like riding home from school in the car, especially with boys, not that eye to eye, side by side.
The car, they'll bring up stuff that they don't bring up anywhere else. That's a great point.
So use that for these things that invite them to share, not, did you do your homework? Is your soccer uniform clean? Did you walk the dog? Did you feed the cat? That's not conversation. Conversation is inviting, you know, sharing of just harmless topics like that. I used to wait until dark often and say to my son Grant, oh, I forgot to walk the dog today. Will you go with me? It's dark outside. And we would walk and talk and walk and talk until I'd heard more than I wanted to hear, and we headed back home. But it's really important to just be intentional about casual conversation. That's not hard to do, but it opens the door for when you have to sit down and say, I want to talk to you about how you're feeling. I've seen some things lately that concern me a little bit, and I just want to know how you're doing, and then ask those specific questions that we talked about.
Now, in terms of age of kids that you're helping, is it primarily later high school, or are parents needing to look for these warning signs earlier? What are you guys seeing in terms of that?
We're seeing it trend younger and younger all the time. I think these days children are exposed to more things on the internet and just viewing, you know, online and things like that than they used to be. So we're seeing, you know, that trend younger. The pandemic really changed our children in so many ways. They've lost so much, and they're dealing with grief and loss still, even post-pandemic here. But you know, their loss of routine, loss of social relationships and being together with other kids, which is vital during those early years. They all struggled with some extent to how to be in isolation and quarantine and all those things. So.
And so did you see an uptick in the need for help because of the pandemic? Was that something that kind of made things worse?
Yes. Stress, children especially, they need other people. They need that in their own age group especially. Stress became went through the roof, stress levels for children and adults, but for children especially, you know, having to deal with remote learning and it was just stressful. They didn't have other students for support or empathy or anything. They were just kind of siloed, and that's not good for children. They really need the community of peers. So stress was really big, and then stress is the number one. Unmanaged stress is the number one trigger for depression. So we also saw depression rates really rise in children. And depression puts a person at higher risk for suicide. So those three things are very closely linked: stress, depression, and suicide. Doesn't mean that a person who has depression is going to be suicidal, but it puts them at higher risk for suicide. So there was a huge increase in suicide attempts and suicidal ideation among young people.
And was there anything coming out of the pandemic that you learned or Grant Halliburton wound up doing differently, because we've gone through these couple of years that were so much turmoil and everything went online, and you know, what did you guys do to react to that?
Well, we really missed being in the classroom, and we like to do classroom by classroom, not big assemblies, so it can be interactive. We really missed that, but we pivoted immediately to the virtual world, and we reached so many people that way. I did a conference virtually for a Mental Health America chapter in Virginia, and reached 400 people that we would never have reached before. So it really opened up a lot of opportunities. We were able to speak to parents in remote remote locations of schools in Texas, way out in the rural areas that would have been maybe a challenge for us to do before. So, and we were able to do classroom instruction that way too. So
that's great.
We didn't miss a beat, and then we put a lot of resources online for students, especially how to manage your stress and things like that. Did little 5-minute videos on a lot of topics around that.
Yeah. And so that's something that nationally anyone can access is on your it is on the website?
Yes.
Okay.
Lots of resources.
Wonderful. We'll put a link to that website on our in our show notes to make sure that people, if they need the help or if they just want to get a background so that they can kind of watch and assess other kids in their lives, their own and others.
We also have another great resource. We started a separate website called herefortexas.com. herefortexas.com, and it has a database of over 900 North Texas mental health providers, searchable by the type of provider you're looking for, insurance they take, location, all kinds of factors. And it will pull up out of that 900 providers the ones that meet your criteria and enable you to make some informed decisions on when you're looking for some care.
Yeah. So, we talked a bit about, what parents should look out for. But as somebody who had to experience this, as you get that call from the school counselor or whatever that might be, what would you recommend as kind of first steps, how a parent can kind of emotionally cope with that and get to a place where they feel like they can ask for help for their child?
Well, I think if we could all frame our thinking that Johnny just came home with a broken leg, not, oh my gosh, he's got something going on mentally, emotionally. How could this be? Is it contagious? How'd this happen? I mean, my son seemed so happy on the outside. He was king of the Valentine's dance. He was voted coolest kid on campus. All these things. He was loved by so many. He was the class clown. You would just never have known to look at him. So I had to make that adjustment. Like, how do we deal with his mental health issues at a time when there was not a lot of support around, where there were not podcasts like this talking about this necessarily. So I think just to look at it like any other physical condition. The brain is an organ of the body, by the way, and just like the heart, lungs, and stomach, things can go wrong with the brain, and that's the way we need to frame that, without thinking of it any differently than the way you would take care of another physical condition with your child.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm so grateful to you for speaking openly and honestly about this. I think that it's something, like you said, is the only way to break taboos, the only way to get out of it is to speak about it. And, I think that I have some personal experience with depression as well. And what I've found is that it's so isolating. And when you were talking about being with children and them needing each other and things like that. And so, do you have any advice around just if a child or, a teenager hears this, they start to get feeling really isolated, what that person can do as well?
A lot of parents, when we do live presentations, will line up after the presentation because they want to ask you about their child. And I remember a lot of times it comes up, my child's lonely. He or she doesn't know how to make friends, and it's just hard for her. What can I do? I think it's hard for a parent of a teenager to manufacture those relationships, and having a play date when they're 5 or 6, that's one thing. But when they get to be, young adolescents and teenagers, that's a little bit harder. So I would encourage them to get involved in activities that naturally put them in groups, sports, things like that, clubs, whatever. They may be kind of a loner, so encourage that. I think another side, this seems kind of a flip side of that, one thing we really have to watch with our kids is their screen time, because that is isolating. And even though sometimes we like to look at that like, oh well, they're talking with other kids and doing lots of things online, it's not the same as walking and talking with a person or sharing lunch or just being together, watching a movie together. So I would say be watchful of the screen time and know that that's not too much, is definitely not healthy for our kids, but it also inhibits their ability to form human relationships, which is going to be really, really important.
That is a great point in terms of wanting to not only make sure they're not watching or seeing things online that they shouldn't be, but also that piece of missing interpersonal connections. So we always like to end our conversations with something we call failed so hard, but it's really just our way of introducing the idea that everyone's going to fail failure is a part of life, and that there's always something that can come out of that. And so is there anything you'd like to share that was a moment that maybe you felt like was a failure at the time, but has meant something to you?
Yeah. I wish I had something funny and light to tell you, but I can't think of anything more of an epic fail for me than not having known what I needed to know about mental illness at the time I needed to know it. Specifically, not having a clue that there was even such a thing as warning signs that a person was thinking of taking his life. I missed them, and in retrospect, I could tick off on the list every one of those warning signs my son exhibited in the days and weeks leading up to his ending his life. I remember at our house following the funeral, a relative came up to me. She was a nurse, and she said, "Didn't anyone tell you that there were warning signs of suicide?" And I thought, what a thing to say. I've just come from the cemetery. But that just burns in my mind. No one told me. No doctor, no therapist, no one mentioned warning signs. We're afraid to talk about that. So epic fail would have been not knowing what I needed to know at the time I needed to know it. And that's why we are so passionate about making sure parents, teens themselves, everyone in the lives of our children knows warning signs of suicide before they need to know it, not after.
Thank you for doing something to get that message out. I think it's absolutely vital, and I'm so glad you were able to join us today.
Thank
you
you
for sharing. And we're gonna kind of lighten things up with one of our video clips of a kid from Annie's place. So let's take a look at that now.
What's your favorite food?
My favorite macaroni and cheese.
Macaroni and cheese?
Yes.
Yeah, that's very yummy. Do you ever put stuff in your mac and cheese, like chicken and stuff?
No.
No? It's really good. Sometimes I put chicken nuggets in my mac and cheese. It's very yummy.
Me too.
Yeah?
Yes.
Once again, I would love to thank Vanita Halliburton for coming on. Thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. And one more time, what is the website where people can go to get a little bit more information if they need it?
It's granthalliburton.org.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, we are going to be off next week for Memorial Day, but we'll be back on June 6th. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Culture of Caring with Natalie Boyle is brought to you by Mommies in Need, a nonprofit organization with the mission of caring for kids so that families can access health care. The podcast is hosted by Natalie Boyle, produced by Tabitha Evans and Real News Communications Network. If you have an idea for a topic or guest, or want to share a #FailedSoHard moment, email us at coc@mommiesinneed.org. Please remember to rate, like, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Video versions of the podcast are available on YouTube.